The soft hum of the central air conditioner filled Emily Carter's office as the late afternoon sunlight slanted through the tall glass windows, casting golden streaks across the mahogany desk. The view of the city skyline stretched endlessly before her: sleek towers, the constant blur of traffic, and the world she had fought tooth and nail to conquer. But today, her mind wasn't on the skyline. Her pen tapped against the corner of a thick folder as she went through yet another stack of job applications. The role of senior project manager had been open for weeks, and Daniel Sloan, her business partner and closest confidant, had been pushing her to fill it before the new quarter began. It was a critical position, one that required both competence and loyalty. Emily had been meticulous in screening candidates, her sharp eyes scanning for potential in every resume, her gut warning her against anything that smelled like risk. Rachel Moore, her ever-efficient assistant, stepped into the office carrying another pile of documents. "These are the shortlisted applications from HR," she said, placing them on Emily's desk with her usual brisk professionalism. "They've all passed the first round of screening. We just need your final say before scheduling interviews." "Thank you, Rachel. I'll go through them now," Emily replied, her voice steady and calm. Rachel left and silence settled again. Emily adjusted her posture, pushing a lock of dark hair behind her ear, and began flipping through the resumes. Each file had a neatly clipped photo, a list of credentials, and a career history that Emily could read like a map, seeing not just where they had been, but the kind of person they had become. Halfway through the stack, her fingers froze. The name on the next application seemed to burn itself into her vision: Lucas Bennett. For a moment, Emily felt the air leave her lungs. Her heartbeat thudded heavily in her ears, and the edges of the paper seemed sharper in her hands. 5 years had passed since she had last seen that name. 5 years since the night he had left her, standing alone in the cold while he walked away with someone else. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting to the rest of the page. The photo was there, slightly older than the face she remembered, but unmistakably him. The sharp jawline, the confident tilt of his head, it was all the same, except now there were faint lines near his eyes and a subtle weariness behind his smile. She told herself to breathe, to keep her composure. She wasn't that heartbroken woman anymore. She was Emily Carter, CEO of one of the most reputable companies in the city, a leader respected across industries, a woman who had built herself from the ground up after he left. Her eyes scanned his work history. He had been with a few companies, each job shorter than the last. The gaps between positions spoke louder than the words on the page. Then came the most telling line. Last position, founder and managing director, Bennett Consulting, closed after 2 years. Emily leaned back in her chair, her lips pressing into a thin line. The company he had left her for, the wealth, the connections, the glittering promise of an easy life, had clearly not saved him. And now, here he was, applying for a position at her company. Her mind betrayed her, pulling her back into memories she had buried. The hotel lobby, the smell of expensive cologne, Lucas's voice telling her it was over. The way he avoided her eyes when he said Victoria's name, the daughter of Richard Cross, one of the most powerful directors in the city. Emily had felt her world collapse that night, but she had refused to let it destroy her. Now, he was back, not as the man who had everything, but as someone asking for an opportunity. Emily sat forward, placing the application flat on the desk. She traced her finger over his name once, then slid the file back into the stack, as if it were just another candidate. She couldn't let Rachel, Daniel, or anyone else see her reaction. When Rachel returned to ask if she should prepare the interview schedule, Emily smiled faintly. "Go ahead with the shortlist," she said, her tone light, as though nothing in the world had changed. But as Rachel left, closing the door behind her, Emily allowed herself one quiet, steady breath. Inside, a storm was brewing. Fate had a strange sense of timing. The man who once saw her as not enough was now seeking a place in the empire she had built. And Emily Carter wasn't sure yet whether she wanted to hear him beg or simply close the door in his face. The morning of the interview began like any other for Emily Carter, on the surface, at least. The city was still shaking off the remnants of dawn as she sat in her corner office, reviewing the day's agenda on her tablet. The glass walls reflected the pale glow of the rising sun, making the skyline appear sharper, almost as if the city itself was bracing for what was to come. Rachel had already prepped the conference room for interviews, arranging bottled water, neatly stacked portfolios, and a pot of coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Emily kept her demeanor composed, moving through the morning meetings with precision, but she couldn't ignore the quiet thrum of anticipation in her chest. She knew the exact time Lucas Bennett's interview was scheduled, and despite her resolve, she was acutely aware of every minute that brought him closer to walking through her doors. By the time the clock struck 10, Emily was standing at the far end of the conference room, her back to the glass, scanning her notes. She had insisted on personally interviewing every shortlisted candidate for the senior role, a decision that, in this particular case, was more than just due diligence. She didn't trust herself to leave Lucas's fate in anyone else's hands. The door opened quietly, and Rachel stepped in with her usual crisp efficiency. "Your next candidate is here, Emily," she said, her tone neutral. Emily looked up just as Lucas walked in. He was almost exactly as she remembered. Tall, broad-shouldered, that same confident stride. But time had left its marks. A touch of gray at his temples, a faint heaviness around his eyes that no amount of charm could hide. He wore a tailored navy suit, the kind that spoke of someone trying to project success, but Emily could see the slight fray at the cuffs. For the briefest moment, Lucas didn't look at her directly. He was focused on adjusting his tie, glancing at Rachel. Then his eyes lifted, met hers, and froze. Shock flickered across his face, replacing the practiced, easy smile he must have rehearsed for this interview. His mouth parted slightly as if to speak, but no words came. Emily felt a strange calm settle over her. She offered her hand across the table, her eyes unwavering. "Mr. Bennett," she said smoothly, "please have a seat." The sound of her voice seemed to jolt him. He stepped forward, shook her hand, perhaps a little too firmly, as if trying to reassert control, and sat down. "Emily? She cut him off with a polite, businesslike smile. "We'll keep this professional, Mr. Bennett. I'm here to assess your qualifications, not to revisit personal history." The air between them tightened. Lucas glanced around the room, clearly trying to recover his composure. "Of course, I appreciate the opportunity." Emily opened his file, deliberately flipping through the pages with slow precision. "Your resume shows an interesting trajectory. A few strong starts followed by shorter stints, and of course Bennett Consulting, 2 years before closing." She let the statement hang in the air, her tone neutral, but the weight of the words unmistakable. Lucas shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. "Yes, there were circumstances. The market turned, and I see." Emily didn't look up, keeping her eyes on the paper. "And before that, you were with Cross Enterprises." Her fingers paused on the page. "That's where you met Victoria Cross, correct?" The question was posed as casually as a weather inquiry, but Lucas's posture stiffened. "Yes, that was a long time ago." Emily finally met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Time passes quickly, doesn't it?" For the next 20 minutes, she led the interview with surgical precision. Every question was professional, every comment rooted in business, yet threaded with subtle reminders of the choices he had made and the consequences that had followed. Lucas tried to project confidence, but his answers carried a faint edge of defensiveness. When the interview drew to a close, Emily closed the file with deliberate care. "Thank you for coming in, Mr. Bennett. We'll be in touch once we've completed all interviews." He hesitated, as if waiting for some personal acknowledgement, but Emily simply rose from her chair. Rachel stepped in to escort him out, and Emily remained standing until the door closed behind them. Only then did she allow herself a slow exhale. The encounter had been controlled, precise, exactly as she had intended. Lucas might not have realized it yet, but the dynamic between them had shifted completely. 5 years ago, she had been the one left behind. Now, she was the one holding all the power. And she had no intention of giving it away. The echo of Lucas Bennett's polished shoes on the marble hallway had barely faded before the whispers began to ripple through the building. Carter and Sloan was not the kind of company where news traveled slowly, especially when it involved a figure like Lucas, whose rise and fall had once been the talk of the industry. Within an hour, snippets of conversation slipped between cubicles over the hiss of the espresso machine in the break room and in the low hum of voices clustered near the elevators. "Is that really him? The Lucas Bennett?" a junior marketing associate murmured to her colleague, eyes wide as she leaned over her desk. "He used to be huge. I thought he retired or something." "Retired? Please," the other replied, shaking his head. "Word is his company tanked, and he's here now at our firm? That's unexpected." From her workstation just outside Emily's office, Rachel Moore heard fragments of these exchanges as she organized the day's reports. She kept her head down, but her mind was working quickly. Rachel had been Emily's assistant for nearly 5 years, long enough to recognize when her boss was suppressing a reaction. The meeting earlier had been perfectly civil on the surface, but Rachel had seen the tiniest flicker in Emily's eyes when Lucas walked in. It wasn't shock, exactly. More like recognition laced with something sharper. She filed the thought away, but didn't dismiss it. Rachel's loyalty to Emily ran deep, and part of that loyalty was knowing when to step in, even without being asked. Inside the CEO's office, Emily was back at her desk, reviewing quarterly projections, her posture as straight and precise as ever. Yet, every so often, her gaze drifted to the corner of the desk where Lucas's application still sat. The edges of the folder were perfectly aligned with the desk's surface, but the sight of his name printed in bold type seemed to pulse in her peripheral vision. The murmur outside grew louder for a moment before fading again. Emily didn't need to hear the words to know what they were about. She had built Carter and Sloan into a company where professionalism was paramount, but she also understood human nature. The employees would speculate. They would fill in the gaps with their own theories, and if left unchecked, rumors could grow into distractions. The question was whether she should shut them down or let them run their course. When Rachel entered with a tray of fresh coffee, Emily looked up, her expression cool. "How's the floor?" she asked, her tone casual, though the question was loaded. Rachel placed the tray down. "Buzzing," she admitted. "People are curious. You know how it is when someone high profile shows up for an interview." Emily's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "Curiosity is natural, as long as it doesn't interfere with work." She lifted her coffee, took a slow sip, and set it down again with deliberate care. "If anyone asks, tell them he's just another candidate. Nothing more." Rachel nodded, though inwardly she remained unconvinced. She had seen the way Lucas had looked at Emily, shock, recognition, and something unspoken lingering behind his eyes, and she had seen the way Emily had contained herself, as if the meeting had been a game of chess and every move was calculated 3 steps ahead. Downstairs in the design department, the whispers were taking on new life. Some claimed Lucas and Emily had crossed paths in the early days of their careers. Others insisted there had been a failed business deal between them. A few even speculated about a romance. though none dared to say it too loudly. By the time lunch rolled around, the entire building seemed to hum with the quiet electricity of speculation. People kept stealing glances toward the executive floor, wondering if Lucas would be back for a second round of interviews, or if his presence had already been deemed unworthy. In her office, Emily allowed the noise to continue. She wasn't ready to confirm or deny anything. Let them talk, she thought. It would only make the reveal, when it came, that much more powerful. For now, she would watch and wait. Lucas had walked into her world without realizing the balance of power had shifted entirely. And soon, everyone, inside and outside the company, would know exactly where they stood. Rachel, still suspicious, glanced once more at Emily through the glass wall. Her boss looked serene, almost indifferent, as if the morning's events hadn't stirred a single emotion. But Rachel knew better. Something was brewing behind that calm exterior. And when Emily Carter decided to move, it would not be subtle. The afternoon sunlight in her office dimmed behind slow-moving clouds, casting long shadows over Emily's desk. She had been halfway through reviewing a contract when her eyes caught the faint reflection in the glass wall. The city skyline blurred, and for a moment she wasn't in her office anymore. She was somewhere else entirely. The scene unfolded in her mind without permission, vivid and unrelenting. It had been 5 years ago, on a cold winter night in New York. The streets outside were glazed with frost, traffic snarled by the early evening rush. Emily remembered standing in the grand lobby of the Langford, a 5-star hotel where Lucas had asked to meet her to talk. She had arrived early, her palms damp inside her leather gloves, heart hammering in her chest. Lucas had sounded strange on the phone earlier that day, but she had told herself it was nothing. Maybe a surprise. Maybe even a proposal. They had been together for almost 3 years. She thought they were building something solid. The Langford's lobby had been warm, golden light spilling from crystal chandeliers onto polished marble floors. Guests in tailored coats and glittering dresses drifted past, their conversations a murmur of champagne and wealth. Emily had smoothed her dress, adjusted her scarf, and smiled when she saw Lucas step out of the elevator. He looked immaculate in a dark suit, his tie perfectly knotted. But there was a stiffness in his shoulders, and his eyes didn't light up when they met hers. "Lucas," she greeted, stepping forward, relief flooding her, until he didn't reach for her hand. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, his voice low but sharp with purpose. Something cold threaded through her veins. "Okay, let's talk upstairs, maybe in the lounge." "No, here's fine." He glanced around, as though the opulence of the setting might soften what he was about to say. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about the future, and I've made a decision." She stared at him, searching for reassurance in his face. "A decision about what?" He inhaled, and when he spoke again, it was like the floor shifted beneath her. "I'm going to marry Victoria Cross." For a moment, she thought she had misheard him. Victoria? The name felt foreign in her mouth, though she knew exactly who she was. The glamorous daughter of Richard Cross, a man whose handshake could open doors to any boardroom in the country. Lucas didn't flinch. "It's the right move for my career. Her father." Her voice cracked, though she fought to keep it steady. "Her father? That's what this is about? Connections?" "This is about the future," he snapped, then lowered his tone when a passing couple glanced their way. "You're amazing, Emily, but you don't have the background, the network. With Victoria, I can—" She cut him off, her voice trembling but laced with steel. "You mean you can skip the struggle, skip earning it yourself, and you're willing to throw away 3 years for that?" Lucas's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. That was answer enough. She felt heat rising in her cheeks, humiliation burning her from the inside out as she realized people nearby were beginning to notice. The lobby, with all its grandeur, had become a stage for her heartbreak. "Good luck, Lucas," she managed, her voice quieter now because she knew if she spoke any louder, it would break. "You'll need it." She turned before he could respond, forcing herself to walk, not run, across the gleaming marble floor. The sound of her heels clicking echoed in her ears, each step carrying her farther from the man she thought she knew and closer to the woman she would become. That night, she went back to her small apartment and sat at the kitchen table until dawn, the city lights blinking through the frost-covered window. She replayed every moment of their relationship, every promise, every shared dream, until all that remained was the sharp, unshakable truth. No one was ever going to make her feel powerless again. And from that truth, a resolve was born. In the present, Emily blinked, the memory dissolving back into the here and now. Her office was quiet, the contract still open on her desk, the city outside alive with movement. But her chest felt heavier, her breath measured. Lucas Bennett was back in her orbit, not as the man who had left her in that lobby, but as someone seeking her approval. And she would make certain he remembered every choice he'd made, without ever raising her voice. The sting of that night had never faded. It had simply evolved into the calm, calculated power she carried now. The morning after Lucas's interview, Emily arrived at Carter & Sloan earlier than usual. The air outside was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain from the night before, and the streets below her office bustled with the rhythm of a city already deep into its day. But Emily's mind was on one thing alone: closing this chapter on her terms. She didn't need to deliberate. She had seen enough in the interview. The self-importance still clinging to him like an expensive cologne, the flicker of defensiveness when she brought up his failures, the entitlement hiding behind polite smiles. He had not changed. If anything, he had learned to hide his arrogance behind a thinner, more desperate mask. Rachel stepped in just as Emily was setting her coffee down. "Morning. HR's asking if you've made a decision on the senior project manager shortlist. Lucas Bennett is one of the names they're waiting on." Emily glanced at Rachel, her lips curling faintly. "Yes. I'll handle him personally." Rachel hesitated. "Personally?" "Yes," Emily said, turning back to her computer. "Have his contact pulled up for me." Minutes later, Emily was seated in her chair, phone in hand. The city skyline stretched behind her like a testament to every battle she had won, every step she had taken since that night in the Langford's lobby. She dialed his number slowly, deliberately, letting each ring echo in her ear. On the third ring, Lucas answered. "Hello?" His voice was warm, almost overly casual, as if trying to pretend the awkwardness of yesterday hadn't happened. "Lucas, it's Emily Carter from Carter & Sloan," she began, her tone crisp and perfectly professional. "I wanted to follow up regarding your interview yesterday." There was a pause, long enough for her to imagine him leaning forward, sitting expecting good news. "Yes, of course. I appreciate the opportunity to meet with you, Emily. I think my experience could really—" She cut him off, her voice steady but carrying a precision that sliced through his words. "After reviewing your application and our conversation, I've decided you're not the right fit for our company." Silence. She could almost hear him recalculating, searching for a foothold. "I see. Well, if it's about specific qualifications, I'm happy to." Her next words were delivered with the calm finality of a verdict. "It's not about qualifications, Lucas. I simply don't accept trash here." The line went dead quiet. Emily didn't elaborate, didn't soften the blow, didn't give him a chance to speak. "I wish you the best in your future endeavors," she added smoothly, then ended the call before he could respond. For a moment, she sat in the stillness, feeling the faint rush of adrenaline pulse through her. This wasn't just rejection, it was a reminder. She was no longer the woman waiting in the lobby for him to choose her. She was the one doing the choosing now, and he was no longer on the list. Across the city, She imagined him standing there with his phone in hand, the sting settling in. A man who once thought himself untouchable, now reduced to a line in her memory, discarded like a resume that didn't make the cut. Rachel peeked in a few minutes later. HR? She asked. Tell them Lucas Bennett is off the table, Emily said, her voice even, as if she had just crossed another minor task off her list. But deep down, she knew this was the first real move in a game that had only just begun. Lucas Bennett had stepped back into her world, and now he would have to live with the knowledge that she had the power to shut the door on him with a single sentence. And that sentence would echo in his head far longer than he wanted to admit. The week after Lucas's rejection, the office had settled back into its usual rhythm, at least on the surface. Emily's days were filled with meetings, contract signings, and strategy sessions with Daniel, but she could feel the faint tremors of gossip still pulsing beneath the professional atmosphere. She didn't care. In fact, she let them run their course. Lucas Bennett had been dismissed cleanly, both from the candidate pool and from any illusion that he still had a place in her world. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Rachel stepped into her office with a peculiar look on her face. "Emily," she said cautiously, "there's someone here to see you." She doesn't have an appointment, but she insisted. Emily looked up from her desk, arching a brow. "Who?" Rachel hesitated. "Victoria Cross." The name rolled through the room like a gust of cold air. Emily leaned back in her chair, masking the sudden shift in her pulse. "Send her in." Moments later, Victoria appeared in the doorway. Time had been kind to her in some ways, but not in others. She still had the kind of beauty that drew attention. Polished hair, tailored cream blazer over a silk blouse, gold accents glinting at her wrists and ears, but there was a slight tension at the corners of her eyes, the kind that no amount of luxury spa treatments could erase. "Emily?" She greeted with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's been, 5 years?" Emily rose to shake her hand. "At least. Please, have a seat." Victoria's gaze swept the office as she moved to the chair opposite the desk. Her eyes lingered a moment too long on the city view, the understated elegance of the furniture, the framed industry awards on the wall. "I have to say," she began, crossing her legs, "you've done very well for yourself. Carter and Sloan has quite the reputation now. I suppose congratulations are in order." Emily smiled faintly, folding her hands on the desk. "Thank you. We've worked hard for it." Victoria tilted her head, studying her like one might study a competitor's chessboard. "I heard an interesting bit of news recently. Lucas, my ex-husband, came here. For a job interview, wasn't it?" Her tone was light, but the glint in her eyes betrayed the curiosity beneath. "That's correct," Emily said evenly. "He wasn't a fit for the position." The corner of Victoria's mouth curved. "Ah, I can imagine he wasn't. Lucas has struggled since the divorce. Poor thing thought the business world was easier than it really is. You know how some men are. They look impressive until the safety net disappears." Emily didn't miss the subtle framing, the way Victoria positioned herself as the one who had removed that safety net. "I'm sure he'll find his way," she replied smoothly, refusing to give the other woman the satisfaction of a reaction. Victoria leaned forward slightly, her perfume drifting across the desk, something floral and expensive. "It must have been amusing for you, though, seeing him walk in here, not realizing you were the one in charge." She smiled again, but this time it was sharper, almost testing. "I always thought you were, too nice for your own good. Maybe I misjudged you." Emily met her gaze without blinking. "Maybe you did." For a brief moment, neither woman spoke. The air between them felt charged, not with open hostility, but with something colder and more calculated, a mutual acknowledgement that this was not a friendly catch-up. Victoria broke the silence first, glancing at the clock as if she had somewhere far more important to be. "Well, I should go, Just wanted to see for myself the woman Lucas once talked about. Now I understand why he seemed unsettled when your name came up." Emily stood as Victoria rose from her chair. "Thank you for stopping by. I'm glad you got the chance to see the company." Victoria smiled one last time, that same poised socialite mask firmly in place. "Yes, impressive. Truly." When she left, the office felt quieter, but not calmer. Emily returned to her chair, her fingers drumming lightly against the desk. She knew Victoria hadn't come simply to satisfy curiosity. This was reconnaissance, a way to measure her, perhaps even to warn her that Lucas's return wasn't the end of the story. Emily wasn't worried. The email arrived just after 8 in the evening, when most of the building had gone dark, and the city beyond Emily's window was glittering with the fractured lights of traffic. She had been reviewing a proposal for a major tech partnership, her mind deep in projections and market data, when her inbox pinged. At first, she almost ignored it. Late-night emails were nothing unusual in her position, but the subject line stopped her hand mid-scroll. From Lucas Bennett, regarding a second chance. Her eyes narrowed. She clicked it open. "Emily, I know you've made your decision, but I can't let it end like that. I've changed since we last knew each other. I'm not the same man who left you. I just want the chance to prove I can be an asset, not just to Carter and Sloan, but to you. Please, meet me for coffee tomorrow. No pressure, no expectations, just a conversation." She read it twice, the faint hum of the office lights filling the silence around her. The wording was careful, almost contrite, but Emily could read between the lines. This wasn't just about a job. This was about him trying to rewrite a history he had created, to regain a foothold in a world that had moved on without him. She closed the message without replying. If there was one thing she had learned over the past 5 years, it was that some doors needed to stay shut, no matter how politely someone knocked. By the next morning, however, the email wasn't the only attempt. Rachel intercepted a call from the reception desk, her tone cool as she told Emily, "Lucas Bennett is in the lobby. He says he doesn't have an appointment, but insists you'll want to see him." Emily didn't even look up from her paperwork. "Tell security he's not permitted on the executive floor, and make a note. He's not to be given access to the building without my approval." Rachel nodded and left without another word. She understood the boundaries Emily was setting, even if the rest of the staff might be tempted to indulge in the drama. It was later that day, during a strategy meeting with Daniel Sloan, that the topic surfaced again. Daniel had been outlining the final stages of a merger deal when he paused, watching her over the rim of his coffee cup. "You know he's not going to stop, right?" Emily set down her pen, her expression neutral. "He'll get the message." Daniel leaned back in his chair, one eyebrow raised. "Emily, I've known Lucas for almost as long as you have. He's not the type to walk away quietly when he thinks there's still something to gain. Rejection will just make him more determined." "I'm not concerned," she said, though she knew Daniel was speaking from experience. Lucas's ambition had once been his greatest asset and his most dangerous flaw. Daniel's tone softened. "Just be careful. Men like him, when they're cornered, can either grovel or strike, sometimes both." The warning lingered in the air long after the meeting ended. By evening, Emily found herself glancing at her phone more often than she cared to admit, half expecting another email, another call, another uninvited visit. The truth was, Lucas's persistence wasn't surprising. This was a man who had once believed the world owed him opportunities. Being told no, especially by her, would sting deeper than he'd ever admit. That night, as she locked her office and stepped into the empty hallway, the sound of her heels echoing against the polished floor, she reminded herself of one thing. She had faced bigger threats, tougher negotiations, and more ruthless opponents. Lucas Bennett was just another challenge, albeit one with a history that made the stakes more personal. Still, Daniel's words clung to her like a shadow. If Lucas wasn't going to take no for an answer, it was only a matter of time before he tried something bolder. And when he did, Emily would be ready. It began quietly, almost imperceptibly, an email from a long-standing client of Carter and Sloan, politely requesting to postpone a contract renewal meeting. Then another, this time from a prospective partner who suddenly wanted to explore alternative proposals before committing. In isolation, such changes were part of the normal ebb and flow of business. But Emily Carter had been in the game long enough to recognize patterns, and this one was not random. By the end of the week, the signs became too obvious to ignore. A competitor's name started appearing in conversations where it had no business being. Pricing figures Emily had shared only with her senior team were suddenly being matched, down to the decimal, by another firm. And when Daniel came into her office late Thursday evening, his face set in grim determination, she knew her instincts were right. He tossed a folder onto her desk. "You'll want to see this." Emily flipped it open. Inside were printouts of emails, LinkedIn messages, and meeting notes, all pointing to one name, Lucas Bennett. He was working through a boutique consultancy he'd partnered with, targeting Carter and Sloan's most lucrative accounts. And he wasn't acting alone. Daniel crossed his arms. Victoria's behind it. Not openly, but she's been making introductions for him. He's pitching himself as the fresh alternative, more personal service, less corporate red tape. Sound familiar? Emily's fingers tightened slightly on the folder. She could almost hear Lucas's voice in those pitches, selling himself with the same polished charm that had once been aimed at her. "They're using information from inside our contracts," she said slowly. "Confidential figures." Daniel nodded. "Either someone's feeding him or he's pulling it from an old connection. But the timing? This isn't just business. This is calculated." The rest of that night blurred into a flurry of calls, document reviews, and strategy sessions. Emily and Daniel split the client list, personally reaching out to every account showing signs of wavering. Their language was precise, emphasizing loyalty, the stability of Carter and Sloan, and the risks of jumping to an unproven operation. But it wasn't just about retaining business. Emily knew she had to send a message. At a midnight conference call with her legal team, she authorized a quiet investigation into the consultancy Lucas had aligned with. If there was even a hint of contract tampering or misuse of proprietary data, she intended to make it very public. By Friday morning, exhaustion clung to her like a second skin, but she refused to let it show. In the boardroom, she stood beside Daniel, presenting the company's quarterly report with the same confidence as always. Yet, beneath the polished delivery, her mind was cataloging every potential breach, every client at risk, every move Lucas might make next. During a short break between meetings, Rachel entered with a note. "A courier just dropped this off for you. No sender listed." Emily took the envelope, sliding a finger under the flap. Inside was a single sheet of heavy paper, embossed with the logo of one of Carter and Sloan's most prestigious clients, a client who had been with them for nearly a decade. Scrawled in pen across the top were 5 words: "I can offer them better." Her jaw tightened. There was no signature, but she didn't need one. The handwriting was Lucas's, neat and self-assured, as if he'd been proud to deliver the message. Daniel read it over her shoulder, his voice low. "He's not just poaching, he's taunting you." Emily folded the note, sliding it back into the envelope with deliberate care. "Then we make this the last move he gets to make without consequences." They spent the rest of the day in relentless defense mode. Meeting after meeting, phone call after phone call, drawing lines tighter around the company's assets. Every conversation Emily had with a client was personal, tailored, and anchored in trust she had built over years. It was exhausting work, but it was also a reminder. This was her territory. She had fought for every inch of it, and she wasn't about to surrender even a fraction to a man who had once walked away from her without a backward glance. By nightfall, the initial damage had been contained. No contracts were lost, though a few would require delicate handling in the weeks to come. Emily stood by her office window as the city lights blinked awake, the hum of traffic far below. She knew this wasn't over. Lucas had shown his hand, and Victoria's shadow was behind him. This wasn't just a business attack, it was personal, woven into the history they all shared. And if they wanted a war, Emily Carter was more than ready to fight one. The ballroom of the Grand Astoria Hotel glowed under a canopy of crystal chandeliers, each drop of light reflecting off champagne flutes and sequined gowns. It was the annual International Business Leadership Gala, an event Emily Carter had attended for years, not just for the networking, but for the opportunity it offered to reinforce her standing among the city's most influential players. Tonight, though, was different. Tonight was not about maintaining her position. Tonight was about claiming the upper hand, publicly and without question. She had arrived early, her navy silk gown tailored to perfection, her hair swept into a sleek chignon. Every detail was calculated, from the diamond studs that caught the light without screaming excess, to the measured steps she took as she greeted old colleagues and industry allies. Daniel Sloan was by her side, the steady presence she knew she could rely on, his crisp black tuxedo a quiet mirror to her elegance. As the evening unfolded, Emily caught glimpses of Lucas Bennett across the room. He was dressed sharply, perhaps more sharply than he could truly afford these days, his charm turned up for every handshake. Victoria Cross was with him, in a shimmering silver dress, her arm looped through his like a trophy she'd reclaimed. They worked the room together, their smiles wide and false, weaving between clusters of executives with the ease of people who knew the power of appearances. But Emily also noticed something else. The way certain clients she'd spoken to just days before lingered with Lucas a little too long, their expressions tinged with curiosity. The sabotage from the past weeks was still in play, and this was their arena to deepen it. It was nearing the midpoint of the evening when the host announced the start of the awards segment. Guests took their seats, the murmur of conversation fading as the first honorees were called to the stage. Emily waited. Her moment would not be rushed. When the time came for the award recognizing Carter and Sloan's contributions to innovation and ethical business practices, Emily stepped onto the stage, applause washing over her like a tide. She accepted the plaque with a gracious smile, then turned to the microphone. "Thank you," she began, her voice clear and steady. "In this industry, success is not just about winning contracts or expanding influence. It's about integrity, about building something that stands even when the storms come." She let her gaze sweep the crowd, finding Lucas and Victoria in the sea of faces. "In recent weeks," she continued, "my company has faced attempts to undermine that integrity. Former colleagues, even those who once had my trust, have tried to take shortcuts, to use confidential information, to mislead clients in the hope of gaining a foothold they did not earn." The shift in the room was palpable. Conversations stilled, heads turned. Across the tables, Lucas's confident smile faltered just enough for Emily to see it. "I want to be clear," she said, her tone sharpening just slightly, "that Carter and Sloan will always protect its clients, its people, and its values. And for those who think they can trade on past associations to erode what we've built, know that truth has a way of surfacing, and that there is no shortcut worth the cost of your reputation." There was a murmur of approval from several tables, polite applause beginning to ripple through the room. Emily held Lucas's gaze for a fraction of a second longer before stepping back from the microphone. When she returned to her table, Daniel leaned in just enough for her to hear. Subtle But surgical, he murmured. You just pulled the rug out from under them without ever saying their names. Later, as the gala wound down and guests began drifting toward the exits, Emily found herself near the grand staircase. Lucas and Victoria were descending from the mezzanine, their smiles back in place, but their eyes tight with strain. "Emily," Victoria said smoothly as they approached. Quite the speech. Stirred up a lot of feelings, I'm sure. Emily met her eyes, then Lucas's, her own expression serene. Good. Sometimes the truth needs stirring. Lucas opened his mouth as if to reply, but Emily was already moving past them, her gown trailing softly over the marble steps. She didn't need to hear his excuses or watch Victoria mask her irritation. The room had heard what mattered, and in circles like these, perception was power. Tonight, she had made sure everyone saw exactly who held it. The rain had been falling since dawn, a steady curtain of silver against the glass walls of Carter and Sloane's lobby. Emily stepped out of the elevator, the click of her heels muted by the thick marble beneath her feet. She had just returned from a breakfast meeting that secured another major partnership, one that would more than cover any ground Lucas and Victoria had tried to take from her. The air in the building felt lighter today, as if the last traces of their schemes had finally burned out. She was halfway to the entrance when she saw him. Lucas Bennett stood just beyond the revolving doors, his suit wrinkled, his hair damp from the rain. He wasn't holding an umbrella, and his once polished shoes were scuffed from the wet pavement. The man who had walked into her office weeks ago with a confident smirk was gone. In his place was someone smaller, weighed down, almost ordinary. He saw her instantly. For a moment, his face lit with something that might have been relief or desperation. He took a tentative step forward, but the glass door between them seemed to amplify the silence. Emily slowed, her eyes meeting his through the rain-speckled surface. No words were exchanged. She didn't need them. Lucas's mouth opened slightly, as if to speak, but she simply pushed the revolving door forward, stepping out into the damp air without breaking stride. The smell of rain mixed with the faint scent of the city and the steady rhythm of her heels on the wet pavement drowned out everything else. She didn't look back. Not once. The car was waiting at the curb, and as she slid into the back seat, the driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Back to the office, Miss Carter?" "Yes," she said, her voice calm, her gaze already shifting to the skyline ahead. By the time she reached her office again, the rain had eased, leaving the windows streaked but clear enough for her to see the city in all its restless energy. She set her bag down and moved to the floor-to-ceiling glass, her reflection merging with the sprawling view beyond. Lucas had been a chapter in her life, but never the whole story. She realized now that she hadn't needed to destroy him to win. His undoing had come from his own choices, his shortcuts, his unwillingness to build rather than take. She had simply stayed the course, built her empire brick by brick until the contrast between them was undeniable. True revenge, she thought, wasn't about watching someone fall. It was about thriving so completely that their fall became irrelevant. Emily turned back to her desk, the contracts for her newest partnership waiting to be signed. The ink she placed on the page felt like the final mark on the past, a quiet, decisive period at the end of a sentence that no longer needed to be spoken. Outside, the clouds began to break, a pale strip of sunlight cutting across the city, and Emily Carter moved forward, exactly as she always had, on her terms and no one else's.